So today I'm going to be making a pallet workbench. Welcome to Dim Tips, the channel that repairs, revives and restores. Please don't forget to subscribe for similar videos like this where I repair, revive and restore. So let's get into it. The first thing I need to do was actually strip down the pallet. Now I had all sorts of problems with the pallet and I couldn't actually get some very long pieces. There were a few that were available. Because of the nails that were actually in the pallet, they were quite rusty and I could only get a few of them, and the others I had to actually cut to size, and you could see me earlier cutting them. Now what I did was I arranged the actual wood pieces, the pallet itself, into various shapes and sizes to see what I could get the best result from. The next step for me was to actually remove a lot of the paintwork, the knots, the marks, because after years of use of this palette, there were lots of dinks and dabs. Unfortunately, I'm not an expert, so I did actually take some largest chunks out, but that's okay. Later on in the video, I take care of that. But it worked out quite well, just me stripping through using a plane that I had. It's quite a cheap plane, but I made sure that it was sharpened regularly so it made light work of the actual paintwork and knots. Then the next step for me was actually just arranging the palette in the form that I wanted, ready for gluing. I found some really nice hardwood. I think it was cherry. I'm not sure what it is, but it was definitely hardwood, which I used as the center inlays, which actually just gave it a bit of contouring and contrast, and allows me, when the tabletop is produced, to actually have some lines to actually follow and adhere to. This is now the back of the actual tabletop. You can see that they're not as long, the pieces that I used here, but I just arranged them ready for gluing and just making sure how I wanted to arrange the palette and how I wanted the final look. Now it didn't have to be as great because it's going to be the bottom of the workbench, but it's good enough. I couldn't actually show you me gluing the pieces. Unfortunately, I skipped a lot of that video, but I handled it in two sections because my clamps, as you can see just there, weren't actually long enough. So I actually glued them using Gorilla Glue in two separate sections, allow them to dry overnight, and then the final gluing was actually joining the two together. Now my clamps weren't long enough, but I had enough pressure for using paving slabs, concrete blocks, etc., to use gravity to actually force it down, and using the clamps to actually bring the two sides of the workbench tabletop together. My clamps seemed to work quite fine. Because I hadn't actually cut them off to start off with, I kept them quite rough, and it isn't necessarily a straight edge right there. It allowed me to actually hold on to them. The next step for me was actually planing down the back side of the tabletop. Now the glue had hardened quite considerably, and as I'm not an expert, self-proclaimed here, some of the wood pieces weren't necessarily flush and level. I should have probably spent a lot more time actually getting that right. What it meant was I had to actually spend a lot more time planing down the various edges and making sure that it was smooth enough to take on. Now my plane, as I said before, wasn't great, and it's quite a cheap one, but what I did make sure was that I sanded the plane down itself so it had a flat bottom, and I also made sure that the blade itself that I was using was very sharp. Now I probably sharpened this after, I don't know, about 5-10 minutes each run, because I was probably taking off quite a few chunks as I was going through it, and there were quite a few knots in the actual pallet wood, but actually didn't work out too bad. And as you can see here, I'm just actually roughly going through it. It doesn't really matter, because you'll see as I'm going through the process, I actually got through that and was able to remediate the various chunks that I was taking out of it. But I just wanted to roughly plane everything and make sure that the lines that were perpendicular to them were actually as flush as I could get, and it was fairly smooth, but a few chunks missing. So I just turned it around, started planing on the other side, and what I found, which was quite annoying, was that I wasn't getting great chips coming out the plane. and I think it might have been the glue, or it might have been the angle that I was using, or the direction, but I was able to get just enough out so that it was just smooth enough and seemed to be okay. What I have got now recently, and hopefully doing a video on at some point, is a newer plane, which is a little bit more expensive, but still fairly cheapish. But seems to be an all-rounder. I'll probably do a video in regards to tuning that up. Now, this is after it's been planed. You can see that it's fairly smooth. There are still some dark patches where the glue has dried, so you can see that I was a little bit overzealous with the Gorilla Glue that I used. This was a godsend. The belt sander that I recently purchased just flew through the material and got it fairly smooth. I started off with 40 grit. I thought I'd go down to 80, but because of the workbench, I didn't want to make it too smooth because I knew that I was going to be bashing it and working on it. But this is the back side, and so I didn't really need to worry about it apart from seeing it at some point. But what I made sure was where the joints of the wood were, making sure that they were flush across the two sides. I started off on one side because my current workbench wasn't long enough and I couldn't reach the other side, and I just twisted it around and just started sanding the other side, which actually didn't work out too bad. So you can see that it's come out really nice across the top, and it was fairly flush. I can't say that it was completely level, and I probably should have spent a little bit more time on it, but it is good enough for the back side. The front side I spent a lot more time on because that's the side of the bench that I'm going to see. It seems strong enough. The gluing, it hardened and cured very well. So I was quite comfortable with it. I did actually run a test towards the end to ensure that it was able to support weight, but I'll reveal that a little bit later on. And what I actually did find was wherever there were knots, I needed to actually be a little bit more rougher, because I guess it was just taking up a lot more of the paper to actually sand down. But the belt sander made very light work of this, and very happy, and left a nice smooth finish. So then it just leads me to the next step. This was me actually refining and cutting off the side of the extra bits of wood from the pallet. I wanted to make it square, so I used the square just to line up everything and try and have a straight line to work off. And once I got one of the lines straight, I used the rule to measure the length. I've got, I think it's like 1.5 meters rule that I have, which is actually very useful for the workbench that I was constructing. And all I did was, once I lined everything up and squared it, I measured across the square of the bench just to make sure that the two sides were actually the same length, and then I was ready to cut. Next step for me, I did cut it, and I didn't get that on tape, but what I used was just my saw, which electric saw, like a skill saw, but it's just a electric revolving saw, a circular saw, gosh, slipping my mind there. And just cut it to size using a straight edge. So this is where I was going to actually install my workbench. Nice spot for me. I've got a plug socket and light switches. Light switches probably causing a few issues there. But there's me now just installing it. I just got a couple of 2x4s, put them on. I used actual brackets around the back. Not great ones, but enough to support it. I used 3 in the end, but enough to support my workbench, and left a gap at the back so that I would have more than enough space to bring any wires up or anything along that I wanted to bring underneath. And actually I kept it high enough. I think it was about 95 centimeters above the ground. It's so that I could actually slide my table saw underneath it, so you can actually see my table saw and some junk just underneath it, wiring, etc., and whatever else that I have. I also have a couple of clamps there, which are fine. And then across the bottom, I used brackets, which I first of all drilled into the concrete below, and then just made sure that the legs that it was on were just secure against it. In regards to the legs going into the workbench, I screwed some screws across the side straight up into the top of the workbench, and that seemed to be sufficient. And there you go, you can see me just at the back. I don't know if I'm going to use an inlay or something across the top there, but that I can do at some other stage. Next was I did need to just seal it slightly, and I just used a little bit of oil, which was there, just lightly brushed it across the top, which just meant that I was able to protect it. And seemed to be good enough for what I was using. Please do check out my other videos where you'll check out my other projects, and please don't forget to subscribe and like. Thanks.